96.3 FM, The Source.
All right, 5 minutes after 11 o'clock. Thank you for tuning in. I've been looking forward to this interview ever since I read the prep material. The book is called In My Hands, Compelling Stories from a Surgeon and His Patients Fighting Cancer. Dr. Stephen A. Curley is on the phone. He's our guest. He is a surgical oncologist, as you probably guessed just from the title of the book, or the subtitle. He specializes in providing surgical care for patients with, oh my gosh, here's a word I don't know, hepatobiliary, pancreatic and gastrointestinal malignancies. He's the director of the Oncology Institute and chief of surgical oncology. He was named one of America's top doctors. He's a researcher. He's the recipient of the Golfers Against Cancer Award. I like having something fun thrown in there.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Dr. Stephen A. Curley, it's an honor to have you on our show. Good morning, sir.
Good morning to you, and thanks for having me.
It really is in your hands, isn't it? I mean, it must be almost a spiritual experience for you every single time you work on a patient.
It really is, and the title of the book was actually suggested by my editor because that's a direct quote from the book. It's something that I hear commonly from patients. One of the chapters I write about how amazed I am that if you go out and buy a car or something, you're going to do some research, you're going to spend time. But I sometimes talk to patients about a really life-altering operation, and they say, after 2 or 3 minutes, I'm good to go, Doc. You know, I put my life in your hands.
Oh, my gosh, yeah.
And that's quite a responsibility.
It is, but you know what it is? We don't know any better. It's one of those circumstances. With cars, we sort of kind of know, but we don't know, you know?
No, it's very true. Well, and plus, you know, we're talking about cancer, and, you know, people want to hear one thing, and that is, I'm going to take it out. And they want the cancer gone, and they want to move on with life, and, you know, they're scared, they're freaked out, and let's get it done.
What I'm looking forward to is hearing some of the stories of things where your life has somehow been affected by the patient. Real quick, I want to tell you something. This is kind of coincidental. I do the Sunday morning lineup here. I don't say a word on the air, but I play pre-recorded shows, and one of them is from a local Catholic priest. And he was saying that our bodies are kind of like tents or like cars. The only problem is when you open them up, you can't see us inside of them. And I was thinking that must be true for you. I mean, you've got somebody open, I guess. I don't know if that's a good way to say that. You can't really see the person, but you get to know them in the weeks and time before the surgery and after the surgery. So in a way, you do get to see the person in the car, in the tent.
Well, that's one of the advantages, in my opinion, I have as a surgical oncologist. I'm not like a lot of surgeons. For many surgeons, you know, let's say you have problems with your gallbladder, gallstones. You know, you go to a surgeon, they see you, they take your gallbladder out. You see them one time post-op, and you get on with your life, and you never think about that person, you know, both as the surgeon and as the patient again.
Right, yeah.
The problem with cancer is cancer can come back. So I follow my patients for life. I've got people I've followed for over 20 years now. So you get to know them. They get to know me. They ask about my kids. I ask about them. They tell me about their vacation.
Yeah.
They show me pictures. You know, so we develop a long-term relationship. So that's a beautiful thing that really is unusual in surgical practice.
And the cancer is not selective. It can happen to anyone.
That's exactly right. It is very promiscuous. It will strike anybody. It doesn't care how big a name you are, how big a title you have, whether you're the richest person, the poorest person. It can hit anybody anytime. The frightening statistic right now is that it is estimated that 1 in 3 Americans will be diagnosed with cancer sometime during their life.
So when you have their lives in your hands, as the book title says, having done it for so long, and when you get to know the patients, do you see some commonalities like that might, in other words, in their personalities or in their attitudes that makes you say, this guy will probably survive, or this one's probably going to have a hard time because they're negative. I mean, is there any truth to that? We hear that kind of thing all the time, but I don't know who we're hearing it from, but you would know.
Well, the answer is there's no blood test or scan for a positive attitude. And I've certainly seen people with a positive attitude, and one of the chapters in the book is a perfect example of it. It's called The Wrestler, and it's called that because the patient was a former very high-level collegiate wrestler, very successful, and in his 40s was hit with colon cancer that spread to his liver. And if you just looked at the statistics, they would have said this guy's average survival would have been about 18 to 20 months. Well, this man lived almost 10 years. Now, it required multiple operations, multiple treatments, but he was the most upbeat, positive, doc, we're going to beat this thing kind of guy I've ever encountered. And unfortunately, being a former wrestler, every time I saw him, he nearly crushed my hand with his handshake and then would give me a bear hug.
Oh, my God.
And just squeezed the very breath out of me. I thought, oh, my gosh, thank gosh, I never was on the mat with you. He was just that kind of guy. So, yes, this was an example of a guy who, even though we could never quite get rid of the cancer, he fought on, he kept a positive attitude, he lived a healthy life, he did everything he could to extend his life, and he was a great example of how you can do that. And the answer to the dark side of that, if you will, I have seen patients who I've said, I think we have things we can do, and they just fall into this deep despair because they have cancer, and it's almost like they do less well than you'd expect. And it's almost like they will themselves to just give up. And that's one of the most frightening things that I see as a physician, somebody who just gives up.
And then on the other hand, you've got the people that are diagnosed with cancer, very, very emotional time, very emotional. And then that patient tries to do everything to be positive throughout the rest of his or her life. And it takes a toll on not just the patient's family, but also on the doctors and the medical staff and everything that try to help that person.
Yeah, it is a journey that involves everybody. Cancer affects not only the patient, but obviously their immediate family members, co-workers, colleagues, because they may miss a lot of work. They may feel sick while they're on chemotherapy. They're in the hospital with an operation. And unfortunately, we don't cure every patient. As a surgeon, I have a higher rate of cure than many of my colleagues in medical oncology, but I get very close to my patients. And we sometimes forget the emotional toll it takes on us as health providers. Again, one of the chapters was a very poignant lesson in this. It's called This Is Too Real. And I was in the room with a young woman, about 50, and her husband, unfortunately delivering very bad news that her cancer had come back very quickly and very aggressively. And one of the chief residents was with me, and all of a sudden I heard a sob behind me, and I turned, and she said, "This is too real," and left the room. And I was stunned, and I finished talking to the patient and told her what we could do and, answered questions, offered support. And when I finally found the resident, I said, "What is going on?" And she said, "I just couldn't stay." She said, "My mother died last year of breast cancer, and I just haven't dealt with it yet." And that conversation brought it all back. And so it was like, wow, we have to support one another, too.
What do we learn from reading the book? If we learn, in some ways, what you've gone through, plus what you've learned from your patients, how are we affected by that? Do you have any feedback from readers yet regarding that?
Quite a bit, actually, yes. And each chapter is essentially built around a different lesson I've learned or a different virtue that's been expressed by patients. And so I think with each chapter, what I've been told by both healthcare providers, patients, family members who've read this book is that it's a really very brilliant reminder of gifts that we should be thankful for and not to be moving so fast through life, which frankly we all tend to do. And to not stop and be thankful for things that happen along the way, gifts people give us, blessings that we receive, that if we're not paying attention, they just sort of blow right by and we don't get it.
That is a really wonderful and powerful message. I want to tell you a quick story about my mom. My mom is no longer with us, but she lived a good 20 years after being diagnosed with breast cancer, and she went through chemo and she went through radiation therapy. But that's not what I want to tell you. I just told you that so I can tell you this. When she would go in for the therapy, I don't know if it was chemo or radiation, but she was in a room with other people who were also getting it. I never was there, but she told me this story, that she didn't like going there because everybody was so down. She was so down. And she said to the doctor, the only thing I don't like about it is everybody is so negative. And he said, no, we like when you are there because you brighten up the room. You talk nothing but positive. You talk about your grandchildren. You talk about the quilt you're making. And so there was a bright light that she brought into the room that they felt made the whole room. I guess it was a contagious positiveness. But on the other hand, my mother felt being around negative people was affecting her. Either that or she was just purposely trying to be the antidote to everybody. Could be knowing her. Yeah. So I don't know.
And that's a gift right there. You know, your mother was giving others a gift by staying upbeat. And, you know, sometimes it's hard to be upbeat when you're getting chemotherapy that makes you feel bad. I mean, you know, there's no other way to put it. You know, you feel nauseated, sick, tired, and it's rough on people. And, you know, somebody who can kind of maintain that upbeat spirit is really amazing. And those people are memorable, obviously. You know, I have other patients, you know, who never... I've got one lady who's a great success story. She's now a 26-year survivor from stage 4 colon cancer.
Wow.
She's angry. She is still angry to this day. She has never been anything other than angry. The very first time I met her, she was angry. She said, I can't believe I have cancer. And her poor husband just sort of sits there quietly and lets her be angry. Mm-hmm. And that's just her way of dealing with it. You know, it is what it is.
Yeah.
And that's one thing that's really grand about your book is that they're not all stories that have people that survive. You have a mixture of stories between those that survive and those that don't. It's a story about their journey along the way.
That's exactly right. You know, I intentionally wrote this, and people ask me, why did you write this book? My patients asked me to write this book. I've always been somebody who kind of take notes and keeps a journal when I hear something interesting or I remember an interesting event from the day. And I would tell my patients, new patients, these stories that are in the book, both to encourage them, but to let them know there were other people who had gone through similar journeys. So they had that sense of connection, like, I'm not alone. Other people have endured this and have gone through it. And the reality as a cancer clinician and as a cancer patient is you may succumb to your cancer. You may die as a result of your cancer. That's reality. And so I felt I had to include some of those stories. A couple of them were very emotional for me to write. They were very painful for me to write because it brought back a lot of those memories that were just difficult to deal with. But it was important to give people a realistic view of what they may face.
Faith, how important a role did faith provide in these patients?
It's interesting. One of the chapters is specifically the virtue expressed as faith. It's also one of the. I've had a lot of patients and other people, call me or write me notes saying, "I can't believe there's a book about cancer that several of the chapters I was laughing, and others I was crying." And this is one of the ones that people laugh over. So the story is called "The Deacon's Wife," a.k.a. the real mother. And the reason for that is I had a patient who had a tumor in her liver. By the way, that's the word you were looking for, hepatobiliary. That's fancy schmancy doctor talk for liver and bile.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome. I should have just said liver. So she had a malignant tumor in her liver. Very nice lady, about 70. prim and proper as you could come. Her husband was a deacon at a Baptist church. She had 3 very lovely daughters. So I did an operation on this lady. I took out the tumor in her liver, went out and talked to the family, told them everything went great. And about an hour later, I showed up in the recovery room to check on her just as her husband and 3 daughters got to the bedside. And her husband immediately grasped her hand and said, "Honey, are you doing all right?" What came forth from her mouth would have made a sailor blush. He called us every name in the book. I mean, she just let loose with every 4-letter word you can imagine. And her poor husband, literally grabbed his chest, and her daughters kind of looked at her and looked at me and said, "She's not acting like my mother." Well, I had a resident with me who was from Brooklyn, and he kind of forgot himself and said, "Oh, she's a real mother, all right." And, of course, the 3 daughters started laughing. And the husband, I quietly escorted them out of it, and I said, some people waking up from anesthesia, they get a little, freewheeling and things like this happen, and everything will be fine. And I went back, and the recovery room nurse just walked by and went, "Wow, that was a mouthful." And, of course, the great news about the story is she went on to live another 15 years, and her daughters and husband just teased her mercilessly because, of course, she had absolutely no recollection of this event at all.
Oh, my goodness.
She was horrified that she had cursed us all out. And it's another example of one of the things that's important about spending time with people and learning something. This woman, as a makeup gift, if you will, that year in December, I happened to see her, and she brought me a beautiful gift. She had taken a cypress knee and had painted it into an absolutely beautiful work of art. It was a Santa Claus. And I'd never seen anything like it. And she gave this to me, and she gave me another one the next year, and I promptly told her, "Stop giving me these, give them to somebody else." But they're beautiful works of art, and she had no formal art training, but she had this remarkable skill, and it turns out she would make these and sell them and give them to charities that she worked for. So remarkable talent, remarkable woman, but it just goes to show you crazy things happen sometimes around anesthesia.
Wow, I'm always afraid that if I'm ever in that circumstance, there's going to be a Me Too movement about me. I just have a feeling I'm not going to behave in that regard. That's how it'll probably manifest itself in me. Robin, you'll have to be there just to make me behave.
Oh, okay.
Make sure I behave.
I think this is such a marvelous book. It's marvelously written from a wonderful, wonderful perspective. And when you wrote these stories about your patients, did you let them know that they would be in your book, the survivors?
So, about 6 of the chapters, obviously we have to be very careful with privacy and make sure we don't, release any medical information. Most of the chapters I actually wrote in a vague enough fashion, or they're old patients who are no longer with us, so I didn't have to. There were 6 chapters where there were characteristics I listed that were specific enough that somebody could be identified. In those 6 cases, I sent the chapter to the patient or their family members and said, "Look, if you don't want me to share this, I won't." Every single one was thrilled that I had included in the book. And they had no problem whatsoever with me sharing it. And so in those cases, yes, I did get, specific permission to use the story and had them check it, make sure they were good with it, and they all loved it.
I'm just curious if 2 things. If I can ask this kind of as a part A and a part B. The part A would be, you specifically, did you in your family have any cancer, or you personally, maybe yourself? Did the work you do somehow give you a different, I guess, perspective of what it was? And then the part B would be, do you think that same thing will happen for the readers of the book?
So the answer to part A is, I oftentimes ask, why do you become a surgical oncologist? Either that, or if I'm at a party or something and you meet people, one of the standard questions we ask one another is, "Oh, so what do you do for a living?" Well, when I tell people what I do, there's a lot of shocked looks and people are like, "Oh, that's not catching, is it?"
Oh.
Gee, I don't know if I want to talk to you. You sound dangerous. So when I was a surgical resident, I had an 18-year-old cousin who was just beginning her senior year of high school, and she was diagnosed with an advanced rare cancer. And sadly, I saw her die in the university hospital where I worked, a very ugly death over the next 12 to 13 months. She suffered horribly, terrible effects from chemotherapy, and I saw the effect it had on her, my aunt and uncle, my parents, and it made me angry. And I then and there decided I had to work on cancer. So that's why I did research on cancer. That's why I've developed new devices and treatments for cancer. That's why I continue to be focused on helping patients who are battling cancer. So the answer to part B is that, my hope in writing this book is that, again, people who read it, whether they've been affected by cancer, know somebody with cancer, are themselves cancer care providers, is that it will somehow resonate with them and provide some direction, course, again, connection, to recognize that they are not alone and that other people are dealing with similar issues, similar problems.
And that hope is really what keeps everybody going. And for you to keep generating that hope on a case-by-case basis is absolutely a blessing.
Well, that's exactly right. And, the first chapter of the book is the virtue displayed is hope. And this is the man who really, I would have to say, is the first patient I ever started, kind of remembering stories about. I was blessed to meet him in my first 6 months after finishing my training. He had colon cancer that had spread to his liver, was from Mississippi, was a Baptist preacher, was told by his medical oncologist, "I'm sorry, preacher, I think you've got about 6 months to live." His hobby was fishing. So the medical oncologist said to him, somewhat flippantly, "You need to go out and do some fishing." Well, this man came to me, and I looked at things. I said, "Look, it's going to be a push. It's going to be a tough operation, but I'm willing to give it a go." We did the operation. It went very well. He recovered uneventfully. That man went on to live 11 more years.
Wow.
His cancer never came back. And he gave me one of the most eloquent speeches at my first visit with him. He said, "I got to tell you, doctor, my other physician took all my hope. And that's a horrible thing to do." He said, "Never deny someone hope, doctor, no matter how hopeless you know it is. Somebody just wants to know that you're going to care and you're going to be there." And again, the fun end of this story is, now again, this man was a Baptist preacher, so you'd think he'd understand forgiveness. He had a little bit of a mean streak to him. After the 6 months passed, when he was told he was going to no longer be with us, every time he came for a visit, he would make me call that medical oncologist in Mississippi, and he'd get on the phone and say, "Hi, Doc, it's me. You want to go fishing?"
Oh.
So
Wow.
he turned the knife a little bit, and that medical oncologist, to his credit, he would get on the phone and he said, "Man, I have learned my lesson. I do not tell patients how long they're going to live. I tell them, look, these are the averages, but that means could be less, could be more. Some people beat it.
Yeah,
we're going to do everything we can for you."
Yeah, and everybody was just had best intentions, I'm sure. Are you in Houston?
Right. I just recently relocated to Tyler. I've been in Houston for the last 30 years, but I just took a new position in Tyler, building a new institute here.
Oh, wow.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Well, the book is getting really, really wonderful reviews. I was just reading through some of them, and the people who have read your book are saying what you said. It's heartwarming. It makes them laugh. It makes them cry. I mean, you've got all kinds of stories in the book, and I can't wait to read it myself. I did find it on Amazon. I wanted to ask you if you have a website dedicated to the book or to yourself.
I've got two. There's drstephencurley.com, Stephen with a V, and then there is drstephencurley.blog, where I have additional stories and more about the book.
Okay, excellent. What a great interview. I knew this was going to be one of my favorites. Doctor, thank you for being on the air with us. Thank you for what you do and for sharing that. I think it helps all of us, whether we're going through it or somebody we love is going through cancer.
Well, thank you very much for your time, and I appreciate it. And blessings to you and all your listeners.
Thank you. We'll take a little break. We'll be right back.
Broadcasting from the Paddock Mall Studios, this is WOCA, Ocala, Gainesville, The Villages, 1370 AM, 96.3 FM, The Source.
Fox News Radio, I'm Chris Foster. President Trump plans to announce his